I think overall, exactly like you said, I think the current and the future of the comic book industry is very positive, very healthy for two reasons, right? The first reason is that the global audience, right, the global consumers, people who read, who watch, who listen, who play, are quite interested in content that is generated from the comic industry, right?
Mhm.
A lot of the genres that are very endemic to the comic book industry, your action, science fiction, fantasy, horror, adventure stories, the romantic stories, uh, perform really well on a global scale, right? They do well in Brazil, they do well in Spain, they do well in the US, they do well in Singapore, and so on and so forth. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, you have this. I think you have a very robust ecosystem of studios, game developers, publishers, toy maker, collectible company, apparel company, everything from Uniqlo, right, to Funko that want to serve that audience
Mhm.
with adjacent products where the content come out of the comic book industry, right? So this obviously can be your mainstream IP such as Wonder Woman or Iron Man, but you also have some really, like you were saying, some very successful independent IPs from the US, such as Umbrella Academy or The Invincibles. And then you layer on top of that, which is content coming from Korea, from Japan, from China, from Thailand, from France. And the appetite just seems insatiable. The last thing I would say about what you said about it seems, very difficult to make money successful in the comic book industry. I would say that that's true of every single industry that you can think of.
Oh,
I don't care
okay.
you're running a gas station or a restaurant. It is really, really hard to succeed. Majority of business fail no matter what field you're in. If you find an industry where everybody succeeds, let me know. I will go do that.
Well, you have so much knowledge. What do you have any advice for any business owners on, I mean, practical advice? You've got so much knowledge.
I don't know that I am necessarily qualified to give product advice. I think my role is to help, right? My role is to help you as a business owner make money, save time. I think my job is not that different than a coach, right? So
Okay.
what I mean by that is that you could already be a very successful entrepreneur or singer or tennis player or whatever or chef. That doesn't mean you cannot get better. And sometimes the way to get better is to either have someone else push you, kind of like the way a producer would do, a producer will kind of try to get the best out of a musician, and or simply to have someone else as a mirror, to be able to reflect back what sometimes it's hard to see yourself. So that's why I answer so many questions of a lot of my job is just to really get the client to understand what they really want and why do they want it.
Hmm.
And once we can figure that out, then we can figure out, how to help them. But to answer your original question, I think one of the things that I always challenge people is business owner is to be very clear what your intentions are. Meaning, is this a hobby or is this a business? It doesn't mean that two things cannot intersect, but quite often they're very different.
Hmm.
Because to run it as a business, it can mean a lot of different things, right? To run a business, you could be profit driven,
Hmm.
and or you can be growth driven, which means you reinvest the profit to grow
Hmm.
the business. But if this is a hobby, then that's completely different.
Yeah.
Because then you're gonna do what you think is right, not necessarily what works. Again, I'm not saying which model is right or wrong. I'm more saying that just be very clear where do you sit and what your timeline is.
Hmm. Oh, okay. That's, yeah, good advice. So what are you doing? What are you spending most of your time on these days?
So again, I have three jobs, right? I got the mergers acquisition job, so you spend time on that. We can come back to that later. I have my advisory consulting job, and then the third job is what I mentioned earlier, which is I serve on the board of a nonprofit that's helping people in bookstores and comic shops.
Yeah,
So those are my three jobs.
that's very nice. So let's talk about the mergers and acquisitions. So what do you, I know that basically you look for companies and figure out the feasibility of whatever they want to do, but can you tell me a little bit about what you do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of two parts, right? So you got the buy side and the sell side, right? So with start with the sell side, right? So on the sell side, it basically means that I I'm representing a company. Let's say it's your company,
Okay.
for the sake of discussion, and I represent you to sell your company. So everything that's involved includes to work through your operations, financials, to make sure everything is buttoned up, everything is accurate. Are there certain things we can do structurally to maximize the value of your company? There is strategy, right? Like how you're going to plan this whole thing out. In other words, again, if we're just having a conversation, are you ready to sell tomorrow? Or are you ready to sell in 3 years?
Hmm.
And when you sell, are you going to keep doing what you're doing? You're going to retire? You're going to do something else? Again, there's no
Wow.
set answers. Again, a lot of it is just really finding out what does the owner want to do. On top of that, then of course there's the marketing, right? Which is like, all right, you're ready to sell your company. Now we need to go find buyers. And the flip side is exactly the same because there's also working the buy side, right? So working the buy side is trying to figure out what the buyers are looking for, right? So
Hmm.
if there's a buyer that's looking to buy a publishing company, a restaurant, a cafe, a comic shop, a toy company, a convention, a distributor, again, it's the same list of questions, which is what is it exactly you want to do? Why? What's your budget? What's your timeline? How does this integrate into your strategy? And one of the questions I always ask, like, where do you see yourself in 3 years?
Hmm.
I will ask the same question with the seller and the buyer. And then lastly, with the buyer, is the inverse of the same marketing as for the seller. Because sometimes I'll be talking to a buyer, and buyer will say, "Hey, I'm going to make stuff up. I'm looking for a romanticy fantasy. Sorry, a romanticy publisher with like a really smart staff, editorial staff who have finger on the pulse, is really part of the fan community, has a really good relationship with authors and agents, really understand the market, and they're kind of like at the 0 to 1 stage. And if we buy them, we can take them from 1 to 8. I'm just using that as
Yeah.
a very random example. So you talk to the buyer, again, you ask them 100 questions, why, and then eventually you arrive at a place that there is clarity what the buyer is looking for. Now you go find a seller, right?
Okay.
So to use an analogy, it's like you tell me what kind of house you want to buy, and let me go find you a house, right?
Hmm.
So 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 to recap, there's working the sell side and then there's working the buy side. It's actually all the same questions,
Okay.
just one is selling, one is buying.
Well, I'm really impressed with the whole picture ideas that you have because a lot of people that represent like a lot of brokers represent people in buying and selling. They don't have the practicality that you have and the whole picture view that you have. You're really taking in everything into consideration in representing these people. I find it very impressive.
Well, thank you. I think that's the hardest thing to do, right? I'm sure you understand this, is to have empathy to see from everybody's point of view,
Hmm.
because that's what I keep repeating over and over and over again for the buyer and the seller in any business, right? This is consulting, this could be publishing a book. Is that what is everyone looking for?
Hmm.
What is everyone's interest? What is everyone's desired outcome? So we can find a good match
Right, right.
because your shared ambition has to align.
Hmm.
If they don't align, that's going to be a really really tough relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. That's
So
probably why you're so successful. You've been in this industry for so many years and everybody loves you. You're just,
well
everybody knows you and
that's
likes
very
you.
kind of you to say. I will say that for anyone who's been doing something for a long time, you gain from experience, right? Another way to say it is you learn from your mistakes.
Hmm.
But you also learn by watching other people, right? You have mentors and you learn from smart people. And the last thing I would say that